Welcome back to the South Stands, a Buckeye football podcast by Ohio State fans for Ohio State fans. From the West Coast, I'm your host, Zach Moore. Today is Saturday, June 7th, 2025, and I have here, sitting right in front of me, Athlon Sports and Lindy's college football preview magazines. Now, we still have a whole summer ahead of us, I know, but when these season preview magazines start showing up at my doorstep, it's a reminder that Ohio State football is just around the corner, and I can't help but get a little excited. We're only 84 days away from Ohio State's colossal season opener against Texas. We're only 45 days from Big Ten Media Days, which start on July 22nd in Las Vegas. So today I want to spend a little time laying down a primer for Ohio State's 2025 regular season. I did this very same thing almost to the day last year. I want to walk you through each game on the schedule using these magazines as my guide. I'll give you a few facts and a few thoughts on each opponent. Of course, we're going to do a much more detailed breakdown of each opponent during the season in the weeks leading up to each game. So I'm going to try not to linger too long on most of these opponents, though I will probably spend a little more time on some games over others like Texas, like Penn State, like Michigan. First, I want to start with the view that each publication has of the Buckeyes this season. Both have a lot of respect for Ohio State. The Buckeyes land at number 3 in the preseason rankings of both publications. Athlon and Lindy's both predict that Ohio State will make the playoff and advance to the semifinals before losing to Texas. Now, it is worth noting they did their playoff predictions before the news broke that the college football playoff will move to a straight seeding model this year. So if Ohio State does finish number 3 in the final CFP rankings, they will receive a first-round bye. And that could mean they meet up with Texas somewhere else in the bracket, potentially in the national championship game instead of the semis. But look, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself here. It's only June 7th. Now, 5 Buckeyes made Lindy's preseason All-American team. Jeremiah Smith and Caleb Downs, of course, made the first team. Max Clare, Sonny Styles, and Davison Igbinosun made the second team. Smith and Downs were also named to Athlon's preseason All-America first team, while Carnell Tate and Sonny Styles were named to the second team. Now, both publications agreed that Ohio State has the number 1 receiver room in America. They both see the Ohio State secondary as a top 5 unit. Lindy's has that unit rated number 2. Athlon's has the Ohio State defensive backs at number 4. Both magazines see the Buckeye linebackers as a top 10 unit. Athlon has the linebackers at number 3. Lindy's has the Buckeye linebackers at number 9, which I think is a little too low. Now, Athlon is a little more generous in its appraisal of Julian Sain and the Ohio State quarterbacks. They have the Buckeye quarterback room rated 7th nationally, while Lindy's has the Buckeye quarterback room number 9 in their backfield rankings, which also includes running backs. Beyond that, Athlon and Lindy's are split in the other position groups. Athlon has the Buckeye offensive and defensive lines in their top 10. Lindy's does not. I personally think Lindy's is underselling both the Ohio State offensive and defensive lines. I think Ohio State is going to be pretty good in those areas in 2025. Finally, Athlon does not have the Buckeye running backs in their top 10, while, as I mentioned earlier, Lindy's has that unit number 9 in their backfield rankings, which also, of course, includes the quarterback. So both magazines are pretty aligned in their view of Ohio State. Neither seems particularly daunted by the fact that Ryan Day will have new coordinators on both sides of the ball. Brian Hartline is the new offensive coordinator. Matt Patricia is the new defensive coordinator. And if it turns out these magazines are right about that number 3 finish in the final CFP rankings, that would be an amazing follow-up to a national championship season. Hey, give me that all day long. A 3 seed heading into the playoff field. I think Ohio State is going to do some damage again this season in the playoffs. I think a number 3 ranking is very much within the grasp of this team. Okay, so why don't we turn our attention to the 12 regular season opponents for Ohio State. Again, I'm going to try not to linger too long on any one opponent, but some require more examination than others. Now, unless you've been living under a rock, then you know that the 2025 Ohio State football season starts on August 30th. In the Horseshoe at noon Eastern on Fox against the Texas Longhorns in a rematch of last year's dramatic playoff semifinal, which, of course, the Buckeyes won 28-14 en route to a national championship. Now, there's been a lot of consternation and hand-wringing around the kick time for this game. Our man, PVH, of course, is among the many, many Ohio State fans that wanted this game to be played at night. Now, reportedly, Fox had been willing to move this game to Sunday night. Remember, this is Labor Day weekend. There's no NFL games. But Texas declined. Understandably, I think. I think if the shoe were on the other foot, Ohio State would do the same thing. The Longhorns would much prefer to play this game at noon than at night. But I will remind Buckeye fans that the first and only time these teams played in the Horseshoe back in 2005, the game was played at night, but Texas won. And I'm firmly on record, I think, that night games in the Horseshoe for these type of matchups aren't always the home field advantage that many Ohio State fans think that it is. I mean, I was at the last top 10 season opener the Buckeyes played in the Horseshoe, which was Notre Dame back in 2022. The Buckeyes were losing that game at halftime and only led by 4 going into the fourth quarter. Now, they would pull away and get the win, but the Irish weren't exactly overwhelmed by the environment. I also remember a top 5 matchup with USC back in 2009 that USC won, and actually that turned out to be a very mediocre USC team, and that Ohio State team went on to win the Big Ten. So again, look, night environments in the Horseshoe aren't always the home field advantage for the Buckeyes that fans seem to think that it is. And personally, I don't think it matters what time of day this game is going to be played. It's going to be electric. It could kick at 3 a.m. and, enthusiasm will be through the roof for this game. That's personally how I feel. Now, the Longhorns and Buckeyes are tied at plus 500 for the best odds to win the national title. Both Athlon and Lindy's have Texas number 1 in their preseason rankings, and the Longhorns are the picks of both publications to win the national championship. Both magazines are predicting an Ohio State-Texas rematch in the CFP semifinals in January, as I've already mentioned. Texas had an excellent 2025 recruiting class that finished number 1 in the country, according to both rivals in 24/7 Sports. The Longhorns finished 24th in the 24/7 Sports transfer rankings, just ahead of Ohio State with 11 commits, 5 of which are defensive linemen, including a name Ohio State fans know well, Hero Kanu. The Longhorns and Buckeyes are almost mirror images of one another this season. Texas head coach Steve Sarkisian returns 8 starters, 3 on offense and 5 on defense. After a program record 12 Longhorns were taken in April's NFL draft. Meanwhile, Ryan Day will also return 8 starters, only it's flipped 5 on offense and 3 on defense after tying the program record of 14 players taken in this year's draft. I mean, outside of Georgia and Alabama, these are the only 2 programs, Texas and Ohio State, that can absorb that many losses and still remain legitimate national title contenders. And Steve Sarkisian is going to have to replace his starting quarterback, Quinn Ewers, 4 of 5 starters on the offensive line, including All-American left tackle Kelvin Banks Jr., who went number 9 overall to New Orleans in the draft. He's also going to have to replace his 3 leading pass catchers, including receiver Matthew Golden, who went number 23 overall to Green Bay, and an excellent tight end in Gunnar Helm. On defense, Sarkisian's going to have to replace a Thorpe Award-winning cornerback in Jahdae Barron. Barron was drafted number 20 overall by Denver, and safety Andrew Makuba. Barron and Makuba had 10 interceptions between them last season. Defensive tackle Alfred Collins is also another big loss for Sarkisian on defense. Collins and Makuba, by the way, were both second-round picks in April's draft. Now, 3 players to watch in this matchup for Texas. Of course, it's all going to start with quarterback Arch Manning, who in a reserve role last season appeared in 10 games, playing 233 snaps. Manning completed 68% of his passes for 939 yards, 9 touchdowns, and 2 picks. He also ran for another 4 touchdowns. It was a small sample size, but Manning finished as the Longhorns' highest graded offensive player, according to PFF. He had an overall grade of 88. However, it is worth noting he didn't really play a lot of meaningful snaps after early November. He only played a handful of snaps in the postseason. Sophomore receiver Ryan Wingo is another player to watch in this game. Wingo was a 5-star prospect out of St. Louis in the 2024 class, the number 32 overall prospect according to 24/7 Sports. In a reserve role for the Longhorns last season, Wingo caught 29 passes for 472 yards and 2 touchdowns. He also ran for 100 yards on 5 carries. Wingo has track speed, and he's the type of player that's a threat to score every time he touches the ball. I think Ohio State fans are going to remember Wingo nearly got loose for a long touchdown on a screen pass in last season's CFP semifinal game, but Caleb Downs got Wingo by the shoelaces to keep him from scoring on that play. Lastly, defensive end Colin Simmons Jr. is another player to watch in this matchup. Simmons Jr. won the 2024 Sean Alexander Freshman of the Year award. Now, Buckeye fans are going to tell you Jeremiah Smith probably should have won that award, and they wouldn't be wrong. That's certainly how I feel. Still, Simmons was a beast last year. He was a 5-star prospect out of Duncanville, Texas, the number 28 overall prospect in the 2024 class, according to 24/7 Sports. And like I said, he was a menace last year for the Longhorns, leading them in sacks with 9. He will be a handful for Ethan Onyeonwa and the Ohio State offensive line in this game. And not unlike Ohio State, the Longhorns are a little short on experience. And week 1 would seem to be a good time to play them while they're breaking in a new starting quarterback and a bunch of new starters on the offensive and defensive lines. But the writers at Athlon and Lindy's are undaunted by the Longhorns' youth. Athlon rates the Texas quarterback room, defensive line, linebackers, and secondary as the number 1 position groups in America. Lindy's is also very high on all 4 of those position groups. They have them among their top 5, but the linebackers are the only Texas position group that they have at number 1. Now, as we know, the Buckeyes will have a new starting quarterback as well in Julian Sayin. But I think Sayin is going to have the benefit of a more experienced offensive line. I think he's going to have the best receiver group in America. Certainly Athlon and Lindy's agree with that. And Sayin is also going to have an excellent pass-catching tight end at his disposal in Max Clara, the Purdue transfer. I also love what the Buckeyes are bringing back on defense, especially in the back 7. And we know those names well, Sonny Styles and Arvell Reese at linebacker. I think they are going to be highly, highly impactful players for Matt Patricia in this defense, and I think Patricia's going to use them all over the field. I think he's going to bring Styles and Arvell Reese in pressure on quarterbacks this season, and we know Ohio State's going to have an excellent secondary with Caleb Downs, Davison Igbinosun, and Jermaine Matthews leading that group. Now, I think all 5 of those players have All-American potential, most especially Downs, who many consider to be the best defensive player in the country. I certainly feel that way. I said this in the spring. I'm also bullish on what Ohio State returns up front. I think Edric Houston and Cade McDonald make an excellent pair at defensive tackle. I also think the late addition of North Carolina defensive end Bo Atkinson from the spring portal makes the Buckeyes a lot better at defensive end than many has thought before the spring. At 6'6", 265, Atkinson led the Tar Heels in sacks last season with 7.5. I think he could easily start opposite Kenyatta Jackson, who I also think is going to have a big year for the Buckeyes now that he can finally play starter-level snaps. I think Caden Curry and Logan George are going to provide high-quality depth at defensive end for Larry Johnson. I really liked what I saw from George, the Idaho State transfer, in the spring game. Now, I think you have to give a slight edge to Texas at quarterback. That's only fair. I mean, Arch Manning saw more live game action than Julian Sayin last season, but it's not as if there's a gulf of experience between these 2 quarterbacks. Manning played 233 snaps, mostly against the dregs of the Longhorns schedule last season. And as I said, he didn't see any meaningful live game action after early November. All but 38 yards of Manning's passing total and all 9 of his touchdown passes last season came against Colorado State, the University of Texas San Antonio, the University of Louisiana Monroe, and Mississippi State. So, look, I mean, the reality is starting against the defending national champions on the road will be the biggest moment to date of Arch Manning's college career. It's going to be a much different animal than anything he's done previously. I think Ohio State is going to have the 2 best players in this game, Jeremiah Smith and Caleb Downs. So I think there's an advantage for the Buckeyes there. Now, according to FanDuel, the early line on this game is Ohio State minus 3.5. The over-under is 50.5. I expect that line to come down as we get closer to August 30th. I see this game as a pick'em. And as both Athlon and Lindy's predict, I would not be surprised in the least if these 2 teams play again in January. I like the Buckeyes' chances in this game, but honestly, this one could go either way. Ohio State could play well and still lose, and you could say the same as Texas. And also, look, you have to factor in Sarkisian has been really good in these spots lately. He took Texas on the road last year to beat the defending national champions, Michigan. And Sarkisian took his team on the road to Tuscaloosa 2 years ago and beat Nick Saban's Alabama team by 2 scores. So they certainly have the personnel to win this game, but so do the Buckeyes. Should be one hell of a battle. I cannot wait for this game. Now, I'm going to lump Ohio State's next 2 opponents together because they share, I think, the distinction of being teams that will put up very little resistance and are likely to teach us absolutely nothing about the 2025 Buckeyes. On Saturday, September 6th, Grambling comes to Columbus for a 3:30 p.m. Eastern kick on the Big Ten Network. This will be the very first meeting between these 2 schools on the gridiron. Now, because Grambling is an FCS school, neither Athlon or Lindy's has a ranking for them. The Tigers finished the 2024 season 5-7 and in 4th place in the West Division of the Southwestern Athletic Conference. I don't know why Ohio State continues to schedule FCS opponents, especially bad ones. I like the Buckeyes by a million in this game. Then on Saturday, September 13th, the Ohio University Bobcats will visit the Horseshoe for a 7 p.m. Eastern kick on Peacock. The Bobcats are the reigning MAC champions, and they'll return 9 starters, 5 on offense, 4 on defense from a squad that went 11-3 last season. Now, neither Athlon or Lindy's is particularly impressed with the 2025 edition of the Bobcats. Athlon has them 82nd in their preseason rankings. Lindy's has them at 88. I expect the Bobcats to put up more of a fight than Grambling, and they have a good quarterback in Parker Navarro, who threw for over 2,400 yards, ran for over 1,000, and accounted for 31 touchdowns last season. But look, this should still be another name-your-score affair for the Buckeyes. Now, the Buckeyes have Saturday, September 20th off. That's the first of 2 off weeks they get this season. Then on September 27th, the schedule starts to get interesting again. Ohio State travels to Seattle for the first time since 2007 to play the University of Washington Huskies. Now, the network and kick time for this one is still TBD, but we know this game will either be a late afternoon or evening kick. It will likely be broadcast on CBS or NBC Peacock. The Huskies, as we know, are only 2 seasons removed from an appearance in the national championship game, but they're coming off a pretty disappointing 2024 season in which they finished 6th and 7th and in 9th place in the Big Ten. Second-year head coach Jed Fish is only returning 4 starters, 3 on offense and 1 on defense from last year's squad, but he does have a promising young playmaker at quarterback in Desmond Williams Jr. Williams Jr. took over as the starter in the season finale against Oregon. Then he threw for 374 yards and 4 touchdowns against Louisville in the Sun Bowl. Leading rusher Jonah Coleman will also be back for the Huskies. Coleman ran for over 1,000 yards last season at 5.5 yards per attempt with 10 touchdowns. Washington is also getting a pretty good playmaker in Denzel Boston back at receiver. Boston finished 2024 with 834 yards receiving and 9 touchdown catches. Now, Fish did pick up 18 commits from the transfer portal, 9 of them for his rebuilding defense. He has a new defensive coordinator in former Purdue head coach Ryan Walters. Walters was unfortunately a flop at Purdue, but he did have some nasty defenses when he was the DC at Illinois. If Walters can do at Washington what he did for the Illini back in 2021 and 2022, the Huskies should be pretty good on defense. It might take a year or 2, though. Again, Washington only returns 1 starter on defense, and, look, Walters is facing a pretty significant rebuild on that side of the ball this season. Athlon has the Huskies number 38 in their preseason rankings. Lindy's has them number 30. According to Athlon, Washington will be, quote, bigger, deeper, and more prepared for the rigors of the Big Ten this season. And they say, quote, if Fish's team finishes 9-3, it won't come as a surprise, end quote. Now, this is the first of a 4-game stretch that I think will make for a very solid, competitive middle of the schedule for the Buckeyes. Husky Stadium is a tough place to win, as we know, and it was pretty well documented last season. Big Ten teams that had to travel over at least 2 time zones really struggled in conference play. At the same time, the Huskies are not the type of team that Ryan Day typically struggles with. Day simply does not lose these games. I think the Buckeyes are going to have to play well to win this game, and I would not be surprised if it's a good one for a couple of quarters, but I like Ohio State by double digits in this game. On Saturday, October 4th, the Buckeyes return home to square off with PJ Fleck's Minnesota Golden Gophers. The Gophers return 9 starters, 5 on offense, 4 on defense, from a squad that finished 8-5 and in 7th place in the Big Ten a year ago. That includes a 25-7 win over a very good Illinois squad and a 24-10 win over Virginia Tech in their bowl game. That record also includes narrow defeats to both Michigan and Penn State. Minnesota was very competitive in both of those games. They played Penn State down to the wire, losing by only 1 point. The Gopher defense was really good in that game. They held the vaunted Penn State rushing attack to only 3.5 yards per carry that day. Now, PJ Fleck is going to be breaking in a new starting quarterback in redshirt freshman Drake Lindsay, but he does get his leading rusher, Darius Taylor, back. Taylor ran for just under 1,000 yards and 10 touchdowns a year ago. Fleck also has a pretty good playmaker at receiver in Miami of Ohio transfer Javon Tracy. Tracy led the Red Hawks with 818 yards receiving and 7 touchdowns last season. Now, the Gophers are facing a pretty big rebuild on defense this year after finishing last season 5th nationally in total defense, 12th in defensive yards per play and rush defense, and 9th nationally against the pass. They were a very good defense a year ago, but they only returned 4 starters from that unit. Keep your eye on sophomore safety Coy Parrish. Parrish was a first-team All-Big Ten selection as a freshman last year. He led the Gophers with 5 picks in 2024. He was also used as a pretty effective return man on special teams. Parrish had a 60-yard punt return against Michigan last season, so keep your eye on him. I also believe he was a player that Ohio State pursued before he committed to Minnesota. Now, Lindy's has the Gophers 40th in their preseason rankings. Athlon has them 42nd. The Gophers will be a very solid, respectable Big Ten team this season that should finish in the top half of the conference. But look, this is a tough spot for a first-year starter at quarterback and a rebuilding defense. And again, look, Minnesota's just not the type of team that Ryan Day has had trouble with in his time at Ohio State. I don't think the Buckeyes are going to be able to just mail this one in. I think they're going to have to earn it. But I don't think they're going to need to play their A game to win it either. I think the Buckeyes win this one by a couple of scores at least. So this next opponent is one that should have Ohio State's full attention because of what they accomplished last season, who they bring back this season, and the fact that the Buckeyes have not played them in quite a while. On October 11th, Ohio State travels to Champaign, Illinois for a date with Brett Bielema and the Fighting Illini. Now, the kick time and network for this game are also TBD. It's been a minute, 2017, since the Buckeyes and the Illini have played football. They were supposed to play in 2020, but that game was canceled due to COVID. Ohio State fans, look, they're going to be reintroduced into this game to an old nemesis in Brett Bielema. Bielema was a thorn in Jim Tressel's side when he was the head coach at Wisconsin. As many of us remember, Bielema won back-to-back Big Ten titles in 2010 and 2011, and his Badgers, as we remember, upset what might have been Jim Tressel's best team in 2010. The Buckeyes were the number 1 ranked team in that game, and Bielema and his Badgers sprung the upset. Now, the Illini returned 17 starters from a squad that went 10-3 and finished 5th in the Big Ten last season. That included a 21-17 win over number 15 South Carolina in the Citrus Bowl. That was a very talented South Carolina team that was playing about as well as any team in the country over the last half of the season. Starting quarterback Luke Altmaier returns for the Illini. Altmaier threw for over 2,700 yards and 22 touchdowns last season, and he is going to have his entire starting offensive line back. On defense, Illinois will have their top pass rusher, Gabe Akis, back. Akis led the Illini in sacks a year ago with 8. Bielema also added a couple of Wisconsin transfers in James Thompson Jr. and Kurt Neal to beef up the defensive line. He's also going to get his best defensive back, Xavier Scott, back. Scott led the Illini with 4 interceptions last season. I think last season, the Illini were greater than the sum of their statistical parts. I mean, if you're just looking at the stats, you would not know they won 10 games. They finished last season 92nd nationally in total offense, 86th in passing offense, 79th in rushing offense, and tied for 64th in scoring offense. On defense, they were 68th nationally in total defense, 78th against the pass, and 65th against the run. That is not the statistical profile of a 10-win team, and yet Illinois did it. They won 10 games. Athlon and Lindy's are both pretty high on the Illini. Both publications have them number 17th in their preseason rankings. Athlon has the Illini secondary rated 9th in their top 10. Lindy's has their offensive line rated 4th in their top 10. Now, the wind tunnel that is Memorial Stadium can be a very tough place to play, especially in late November. But this game's going to be played in early October. I don't know that weather's going to be the factor that it would normally be. And I think Brett Bielema is a really good coach, but I just question whether Illinois is going to have the playmaking on offense to keep pace with Ohio State's offense. And I think this Illinois defense doesn't look like the nasty unit Bielema had a few years ago when Ryan Walters was his DC. Illinois is a chic pick to make the playoffs this season. We'll see how they handle those expectations. I question whether a game manager in Luke Altmaier and a mediocre running game are going to be enough to really challenge the Ohio State defense. Again, I think the Illini is going to have Ohio State's attention in this game, and I think the Buckeyes get out of Champaign with a pretty convincing win here, something like a 34-17. The following Saturday, October 18th, the Buckeyes travel to Madison, Wisconsin for a date with Luke Fickell's Wisconsin Badgers. Now, the kick time and network for this game are also TBD. Normally, a trip to Madison, Wisconsin for what I think will probably be a night game would stand out to me as a potential pitfall for the Buckeyes. But so far under Luke Fickell, Wisconsin has really veered way off course for the program it was during the peak Paul Chryst years when they won 34 games between 2015 and 2017. Under Luke Fickell, the Badgers have been a disappointment. They've lost 13 games over the last 2 seasons. They've been unwatchable on offense. The quarterback play has been atrocious. Now, the Phil Longo experiment in Madison is over. Luke Fickell has gone out and got himself a new offensive coordinator in Jeff Grimes, who comes over from Kansas. Fickell will also have a new quarterback in Maryland transfer Billy Edwards Jr. Edwards Jr. threw for just under 2,900 yards and 15 touchdown passes for a dreadful Maryland team last year. Athlon has the Badgers 44th in their preseason rankings. Lindy's has them 55th. Fickell returns 10 starters, 4 on offense, 6 on defense from a team that went 5-7 and finished 12th in the Big Ten. Luke Fickell is going to have the Badgers playing good defense like he always does. I just don't know how much Billy Edwards Jr. is going to help the offense. And it doesn't appear that Wisconsin has anyone on the roster that compares to the great running backs that have defined this program over the years. I mean, look, Ron Dane, I don't think is going to be walking through that door this season. I think the Wisconsin defense probably keeps this game close for a quarter or two, but I think the Buckeyes roll in this game. It's just too much firepower for the Badgers to deal with. The following Saturday, October 25th, is the second of Ohio State's 2 off weeks. The Buckeyes will have a chance to rest up and get ready for another colossal top 3 showdown with Penn State. That's right. On November 1st, James Franklin and the Penn State Nittany Lions come to Columbus for what will very likely be, or could very well be, a number 1 versus number 2 matchup for pole position in the Big Ten. Athlon and Lindy's love Penn State. Both magazines have the Lions ranked number 2 in their preseason rankings. Both publications predict that Penn State will win the Big Ten and play Texas for the national title. According to Lindy's, Penn State has the number 1 rated backfield in the country, the number 2 rated offensive line, the number 2 rated defensive line, and the number 6 rated secondary. Athlon has a similar view of those position groups. They rate the Penn State running backs number 1 nationally, the offensive line number 2, the defensive line number 3, and the Penn State secondary number 5. Now, Athlon has a separate ranking for quarterbacks, and they rate Drew Aller and the Penn State quarterback room number 6. So high expectations from both of these publications for Penn State. James Franklin returns 12 starters, 7 on offense, 5 on defense from a squad that went 13-3 and finished second in the Big Ten. We also know Penn State made the CFP semifinals last year. Now, Franklin is attempting to use the same formula as Michigan and Ohio State did to win their national championships the last 2 seasons, and that is by bringing back a large group of highly productive fourth-year players like running backs Katron Allen and Nick Singleton, quarterback Drew Aller, defensive end Dennis Sutton, and defensive tackle Zane Durant. I am highly skeptical that Penn State can bear the weight of those lofty expectations this season. James Franklin is 3-17 in his career against top 10 opponents. Last season, he lost every game he played against a true matchup opponent. At home to Ohio State, in the Big Ten title game to Oregon, in the CFP semis to Notre Dame. And look, the reality is Penn State's run to the semis in the college football playoff was aided in a very large part to a really easy draw. And they got SMU in the first round. They got Boise State in the quarterfinals. I don't think Penn State makes that run to the semis without that easy path. And as much returning talent as they have, let's not forget, they did lose far and away their top 2 players in defensive end Abdul Carter and tight end Tyler Warren to the NFL. Carter went number 3 to the Giants. Warren went number 14 to the Colts. Now, Drew Aller completed a career-best 66.5% of his passes and threw for a career-high 3,327 yards last season. But when it really mattered in Penn State's biggest moments last season, Aller was pedestrian at best. In 4 postseason games last year, Aller's completion percentage dipped to 53%. In the semifinal loss to Notre Dame, he was only 12 of 23 for 135 yards and a devastating late-game interception that allowed the Irish to kick the game-winning field goal. And in the home loss to the Buckeyes last season, Aller was only 12 of 20 for 140 yards and a red zone pick. He did not throw a touchdown in either of those games. Now, James Franklin is betting big on 3 incoming transfers at receiver to help Drew Aller in the passing game, including Syracuse transfer Trevor Pena and Troy transfer Devontae Ross. Pena was one of Kyle McCord's favorite targets last season, catching 84 balls for 941 yards and 9 touchdowns. And Ross was a first-team All-Sun Belt selection last season for Troy. He led the Trojans with 76 catches for just over 1,000 yards and 11 touchdowns. Pena and Ross are probably going to be the best receivers Aller has had in his career at Penn State. We will find out how much of a difference they'll make on November 1st against the Buckeyes. I don't know how much of a difference Jim Knowles is going to make as Penn State's new defensive coordinator in this matchup. As good as the Ohio State defense was under Knowles last season, we did see some face plants by Knowles in big moments in his 3 seasons in Columbus. I mean, last year's stinker at Oregon comes to mind, and the 2022 Michigan game is another one that comes to mind. Besides, defense has never really been the issue for Penn State in this game. It's always been the offense. So I don't know how much of a factor Jim Knowles is going to be in this matchup. Penn State's going to have to show me that they can win a matchup game like this one before I can consider them a real threat to the Buckeyes. They'll have an opportunity. They play Oregon earlier in the season. If they can manage to win that game, maybe I'll be a believer in them in this game. Until then, I mean, to me, this game looks like all the others that we've seen in this series with James Franklin at the helm. It'll be very competitive. It'll be very close. It'll come down to late fourth quarter, but the Buckeyes always find a way to win this game. I like the Buckeyes by a touchdown in this game. They're just going to find a way to win it. So it'll be interesting to see where the Buckeyes are at this point in the season. 8 games in, having played 2 top 3 opponents and a top 20-ish opponent in Illinois on the road. I think we will have learned a lot about the Buckeyes by this stage of the season. So in the interest of time, I'm going to skim through these next 3 games quickly. The schedule in November leading up to the Michigan game should afford Ohio State a little bit of a breather. On November 8th, the Buckeyes travel to West Lafayette to play the worst team in the Big Ten and one of the worst teams in the FBS, the Purdue Boilermakers. The kick time and network for this game are still TBD. Now, Purdue is rebuilding under new head coach Barry Odom, who comes over from UNLV, where he held the same post for the last 2 seasons. According to 24/7 Sports, 54 incoming transfers for Odom this offseason and 56 outgoing transfers, including tight end Max Clare, who is now a Buckeye, and safety Dylan Thieneman, who is now at Oregon. Athlon has Purdue 104th in their rankings. Lindy's has them 102nd in theirs. The Buckeyes win this game by 1,000,000. That takes us to November 15th. The Buckeyes return home to play the UCLA Bruins, a team they have not played since September 22nd, 2001. That was Jim Tressel's first season at Ohio State. The Bruins won that game 13-7, and a guy by the name of Deshaun Foster was their leading rusher that day. Foster is now the head coach at UCLA, and he returns 4 starters, 3 on offense, 1 on defense from a squad that went 5-7 and finished 12th in the Big Ten last season. It was a disappointing first season in the Big Ten for the Bruins, but it would appear help is on the way in the form of Tennessee transfer quarterback Nico Iamaleava. Iamaleava became persona non grata this offseason after a public falling out with Tennessee over NIL money, and UCLA was the beneficiary. Athlon has UCLA number 62 in their preseason rankings. Lindy's has them 57th, so neither publication is expecting much from the Bruins this season, but I think Iamaleava is still a promising prospect, and he might give UCLA a puncher's chance in this game, especially if the Buckeyes aren't entirely focused on the task in hand. There always seems to be at least one game like that every year, and it's often in the month of November. But again, look, Ryan Day does not lose these kinds of games. Iamaleava might keep the Bruins in it for a while, but the Buckeyes just have too much firepower. I like the Buckeyes by 3 touchdowns in this game at least. Okay, let's fast forward quickly to November 22nd. Greg Schiano and the Rutgers Scarlet Knights come to Columbus for the first time since 2022. The kick time and network for this game are still TBD. These teams did not play last season. Schiano returns 10 starters, 8 on offense, 2 on defense from a team that went 7-6 and finished 9th in the Big Ten a year ago. Quarterback Ethan Kaliakmanis, who transferred from Minnesota last year, returns for his senior season. But star running back Kyle Monangai is off to the NFL, and Greg Schiano lost what I believe probably to be his best defensive player, linebacker Mohamed Toure. Now, Toure did not play last season. He missed the 2024 season with a knee injury, but he was clearly their best defensive player in 2023. Toure has transferred out. He will play his final season for the Miami Hurricanes. Now, Athlon and Lindy's have been mostly in lockstep in their assessment of Ohio State's opponents this season, but they have very different views of the Scarlet Knights. Athlon has Rutgers number 43 in their rankings, but Lindy's isn't as taken with the Scarlet Knights. They have them 78th in their rankings. Now, is there a chance Greg Schiano might catch the Buckeyes looking ahead to Michigan here in this spot? Sure. I mean, we're sure to see some trickery from Greg Schiano in this game, but I think we're also going to see a lot of Ohio State points. I like the Buckeyes in a laugher in this game. Okay, that brings us finally to November 29th, the regular season finale, and a trip to Ann Arbor to play the Michigan Wolverines. This game will be a noon Eastern kick on Fox. After last year's stunning loss at home to the Wolverines, Ryan Day is 1-4 in this game. He's lost the last 4, as we know. Now, you can certainly question the legitimacy of several of those losses, the 2021 and 2022 games in particular, due to the impermissible advanced scouting orchestrated by Connor Stallions. By the way, as I prep for this podcast today, Michigan is meeting with the NCAA Committee on Infractions about all that shit, and we should know the extent of their punishment here in a few weeks. Now, we know that head coach Sherrone Moore will be facing at least a self-imposed 2-game suspension this season for his role in that scandal. Moore will not coach against Michigan's Week 3 and Week 4 opponents, Central Michigan and Nebraska. The NCAA Committee on Infractions may have something to say about that, though. There could be a longer suspension coming for Moore. We'll see. Now, most of the experts agree that this will be a good, not great Michigan team, a fringe playoff team at best. Sherrone Moore returns 10 starters, 4 on offense, 6 on defense from a squad that went 8-5 and finished tied for 7th in the Big Ten. But of those 8 wins, one of them was the colossal upset of the number 2 Buckeyes in Columbus. Another was a win over number 11 Alabama in the bowl game, so a very strong finish for Michigan to last season. Now, Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant, Josiah Stewart, and Will Johnson are all gone, but Michigan projects to have a very, very good defense again this season. They almost always do. They will be as good as anyone at linebacker with seniors Ernest Hausman and Jayshawn Barham, and they return a very productive defensive end in senior Derek Moore. Now, Michigan's fortunes on offense are almost entirely tied to freshman phenom Bryce Underwood, the number one overall player in the 2025 class, according to 24/7 Sports. If Underwood is not the day one starter at quarterback for the Wolverines, he almost certainly will be by the time the Buckeyes get to Ann Arbor. Now, Athlon has Michigan at number 15 in their preseason rankings. Lindy's has them at number 16. Both publications have the Michigan defensive line and linebackers rated in the top 10 of their position rankings. And Lindy's has Michigan number 10 in their backfield rankings. They like the combination of Bryce Underwood with running backs Jordan Marshall and Alabama transfer Justice Haynes. Finally, both publications have place kicker Dominic Zavada as a first-team preseason All-American. Zavada, I say this with a straight face, he is a legit weapon for Michigan. And the way they like to play, I'm envisioning a lot of 13-10, 17-14 games for Michigan this season, and Zavada is going to be a huge factor in all of them. This Michigan team, guys, I mean, look, it looks very much like the kind of squad that has given Ryan Day's teams fits over the last 4 years, with a veteran defense, a good running game, excellent special teams, and an athlete at quarterback who can make plays outside of structure. But the most important question for me is, can Ryan Day get out of his own way and clear the mental block he seems to have coaching against this program? I mean, his roster is plenty good enough to win this damn game. Now, according to FanDuel, the early line here is Ohio State minus 5.5. The over-under is 47.5. By the way, this is the only other early line they've released beyond the first week of the season, so even FanDuel can't wait for this game. It's entirely too early for me to say with any confidence that the Buckeyes will finally get a win in this game. I can't really say where my concernometer is, but I do think winning the national title last year takes a little pressure off Ryan Day. So I think that's good. And I also think that making that postseason run to the title last year, Ryan Day picked up some transferable lessons, I think, that he can apply to help him win this game. Okay, we did it. You can consider yourself primed for the 2025 regular season. We got a long summer ahead of us. Look for another pod from us in the coming weeks as we inch closer to the start of the regular season. Until then, thanks so much for listening, and go Bucks. You've been listening to The South Stands, a Buckeye football podcast. Follow us on X at South_Stands.